I guess it's David Shor. David is head of data science for Open Labs. Open Labs is a nonprofit research lab. Hey, I'm so happy to have you here, Miami guy.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here. Happy to talk to a Miami station.
Uh, David, I'm fascinated by the autopsy that you made of the last election results. And I'm amazed at the data you gather specifically on minority voters and within that definition, Hispanics. Share some of the knowledge you gain.
Sure, talking through just to understand some of the trends that happened in 2020. I think
Miami.
just to talk through all of it, non-college educated white voters were basically where they were in 2020. College educated whites swung by something like 6 or 7%, which is quite a lot. But what's very interesting is non-white voters trended against the Democratic Party. African American voters swung something like 2% against the Democratic Party, but Hispanic voters swung something like 7 or 8%. Maybe even 9% against the Democratic Party. That trend was particularly large in Florida, not just in South Florida, but also in Osceola County that has a large Puerto Rican population. In Florida, Hispanic voters swung 14 percentage points against Democrats. That means that something like 1 in 7 Hispanic voters voted for Clinton and then voted for Trump. And when you analyze some of the subgroups, it is true that Cuban Americans swung somewhat more than the average, but actually the largest shift was among Latin American Hispanics, particularly Colombian and Venezuelan neighborhoods. One of my favorite examples is Doral, which is very close to where I went to college. There was a precinct that voted 40 by where that Hillary Clinton won by 40 points and that Donald Trump won by 10 points. So these are absolutely massive shifts, and Florida saw some of the largest in the country.
So why so in Florida? Was it this socialist thing, this campaign that the Republican Party conducted, saying that if the Democrats got back into power, we would have some sort of Chavez or Castro type dictatorship. Was that it, or were there other reasons?
I think there were two big factors, and I think socialism is the less important of the two, but I'll talk about it first, which is, when we see this pattern of Venezuelan and Colombian neighborhoods trending so far against, so much against the Democratic Party, I think it tells a really clear story. If you look at survey data, Venezuelans and Colombians are very skeptical of socialism in the US. Cubans are too, but of course, most Cubans are Republicans or not, and meanwhile, Democrats historically did very well with Latin American voters. And so I think it tells a clear story that, socialism means something different, to white liberals. They think of Sweden, they think of Norway, while it means something very different if you're from Colombia, where FARC paramilitaries have been, ravaging the country for decades, or Venezuela, where you have, Chavez and Maduro. But I think the biggest factor, we did is basically crime. We did a large survey of thousands of Hispanic voters after the election to try to figure out, why did this big shift happen? And one of the largest single predictor of someone going from Clinton to Trump was attitudes toward crime, attitudes toward policing, attitudes toward public safety. And so I think that really did play a large role in this, in this specific swing. And the other thing I'd say, just to support that point, is something I think is very interesting, is that the swing among Hispanic women was actually almost twice as large as the swing among Hispanic men. And I think that's very interesting, because I think a lot of people, I think, and I find it a little bit offensive, like to talk about Hispanic machismo as the reason why so many people, so many Hispanic voters voted for Trump. But actually, it was Hispanic women who swung the most. And I think that makes a lot of sense in polling. It's generally true that women care a lot more about crime and a lot more about public safety. And so I think it really makes a lot of sense and supports that point. But the other thing I'd say is that this is not just about 2020. In 2018, Democrats also, particularly in South Florida, saw large swings toward Republicans relative to 2016, and that was also true across the country. And so I think that there's a bigger picture trend. Socialism and defund the police were manifestations of this bigger picture problem, which is that the Democratic Party has its brand has become increasingly more liberal, and that's a really big deal because among white people, something like 90% of white liberals vote for Democrats, and something like only 20% of white conservatives vote for Republicans. But among non-white voters, historically, Democrats have done very well among non-white conservatives, both Black and Hispanic conservatives. And if you want to, I think the biggest number, the most important number to understand this is that in 2016, Hillary Clinton won Hispanic voters by something like, I think, 15 to 20 points. And in 2020, Donald Trump won Hispanic conservative voters by double digits. And so I think that that's really the biggest issue, is that as kind of white, highly educated liberals have increasingly defined the brand of the Democratic Party, and that's manifested itself in a lot of ways, whether it's the increasing salience of socialism as a label, or whether it's embracing defund the police. It's really alienated Hispanic voters, and particularly Hispanic conservatives, because most Hispanic voters do not identify as liberal.
Now, is that a trend that's not reversible? Can the Democrats do anything to, you know, uh, change that? Is it going to grow? Is it going to be even more Hispanics and other minority voters going to the Republicans in 2022?
It's definitely a possibility. I think one of the really interesting things about ideology is that even though there are very big differences in partisanship by race, roughly the same fraction of white, Black, and Hispanic voters identify as liberal, moderate, and conservative. And so if we get to a world where Hispanic conservatives vote like white conservatives, or Black conservatives vote like white conservatives, then Democrats would lose Hispanic and Black voters. And in order for Democrats to prevent this from happening, they really have to change the direction that their brand has taken. Right now, something I like to say is that less than 5% of the American public are white college graduates who are less than 34 years old. But these young white college graduates make up the vast majority of people who work in democratic politics, the people who work in progressive media. And I think that if we let that trend continue, we're going to turn off a lot of people with ideological language. And the best thing that Democrats can do to, combat this, and I think this is something Joe Biden has done a good job of, is to focus on these less ideological, popular economic issues that both Hispanic and white conservatives agree with Democrats on. Making it easier to get healthcare, making it easier to go to college, but avoiding large tax increases and avoiding the socialism label.
One thing that you bring out in your analysis of the data is that what you mentioned, it's not only South Florida. There was a trend also in Texas, in the border counties of Texas and in other parts of the country. But let me ask you this. I've been covering politics before you were born, even though you're much smarter than I am, know much more about it. I don't think there's a Hispanic community. I think there's a Hispanic community in South Florida. I think that in the I-9 corridor, I think people maybe, yeah, they have that in common, crime and public safety. But I think Mexican Americans, in Texas are different from Mexican Americans as voters in California. I covered all those areas when I worked at Univision and Telemundo. What do you think? Is there a Hispanic community in voting community in the same sense that we can say there's a Black Afro-American voting community, and maybe they more or less vote the same in South Carolina than they do here in South Florida?
I mean, I think it's absolutely true that the Hispanic vote is not a monolith. Dominicans and Puerto Ricans and Mexicans and Cubans and, Spaniards in New Mexico, which I think is
Yeah.
kind of an underrated constituency as well. They all have, very different history, and they vote, very differently. But I think something that's very important is that most of them, Cubans accepted, have historically been Democrats, even if they're at varying rates. And I think something that they all have in common is that very large fractions of them identify as conservative. And they still voted for Democrats, even though they had relatively conservative views on, social issues. One for, historical reasons, some perception that the Republican Party didn't want to like people like them. But I think, the biggest reason is I think that the Democratic Party had something to offer them. Something I found in my work repeatedly. It's been a big fight in my career, is that there are so many people in the Democratic Party who want to essentialize Hispanic voters and say that the only thing that they care about is immigration and that we should just only talk to them about immigration. And I think that what we've seen in test after test is that Hispanic voters are, just like any other voter, they care a lot about schools, they care a lot about public safety, they care about healthcare. And I think that just to answer your question, if we want to do better with voters, it is very important to acknowledge that all of these communities are different and to meet them where they are. But I think it's important to talk to them about issues that they actually care about the most, as opposed to what we think they should care about.
Let me go to the Afro-American vote. And you say there is a conservative, not a majority, but a lot of Afro-Americans are very conservative on social issues. Is guns one of those issues? And I'll tell you why. Out of curiosity, I started going to gun shows, to see who goes there. It's the reporter in me. I was amazed by the number of Afro Americans who go to gun shows, and I started asking, and they would tell, well, we live in neighborhoods, that sometimes they're crime ridden. We can't move into Coral Gables, etc. So I was amazed, and I've told politicians here in South Florida, maybe that's an issue. Maybe they blow me off. Do you blow me off? I mean, is that an issue?
No, no. I mean, I think that there are real divides here. It is true that a lot of African Americans own guns, and a lot of African Americans care a lot about public safety, and they care a lot about crime. They live in neighborhoods that have more crime. I think the numbers are that they do support various measures of gun control, but I think that they probably disagree with liberals on a lot of things. And another angle to this is that gun laws, particularly in places like New York, have been used as an excuse to harass African Americans. The stop and frisk program in New York was about trying to find illegal guns, and so it is a complex issue. And something I wanted to say, just to respond to the last thing you said, is that Black voters themselves are increasingly not a monolith. Something like 12% at this point of Black people in this country either are immigrants, and they do vote differently. If you look, one of the really interesting things, if you look at the precinct election results in both 2016 and 2020, is that Haitians, for example, actually voted for Trump in much higher numbers than they voted for Obama. I think there were something like 6 or 7% swings, and so I think it does go to show you can't expect different immigrant groups that have a totally different historical context, to vote the same way that we expected these groups to in the 1960s or 1970s.
What kind of a reaction have you had to your autopsy, from Democratic leadership? Are they taking you into account? I think it's very serious research and even more rigorous analysis by you. What's the DNC
Yeah.
say?
Oh, thank you. I've been really happy with the response to the research so far. Barack Obama retweeted it late last week, which I was very thrilled about. It made my mom very happy. And I've had a lot of really great conversations, with different people in the party. I think that there's a growing acknowledgement that there is a problem. I think the results of 2020 really laid this bare. That if Democrats had pinned their hope on the idea that demographics was destiny, that this increasing non-white diversifying electorate would secure their long-term victory. And I think that these double-digit declines among Hispanic voters really lays bare, this contradiction, that if they keep going the way that I think that the reason Democrats were so excited by this demographic narrative was that they really wanted to believe that they could just lay back and not worry about persuading people and still win elections. And I think that this election really shows, even though they won, it really shows that the future doesn't necessarily belong to them. And if they want to win elections, they have to work for it.
What's going to happen in the immediate future here in Florida? Do you think the Democrats have any chance against DeSantis is running for re-election? The state legislature, which it's been under Republican control for years. It's up for I don't think it's up for grabs. I think the Republicans have an advantage. Let me ask you this way, and excuse my rusty English, David. Has Manny Diaz, the new state party Democratic chairman, contacted you? Has he given you any feedback on your research?
No, I can't say I've spoken to anyone in the Florida Democratic Party, though. Yeah, I'd love to talk to anyone.
I want to send this to Mr. Diaz, by the way.
Oh, please, I'd be flattered. Thank you. Something I'll say just about Florida specifically. I think there were kind of two underrated trends. There were two big reasons I think why Florida was swung so much to the right. The first one has been talked about a lot. That Florida has a large non-white population, a large Hispanic population, and that's a group that swung against us. And also, for what it's worth, it seems like Democrats also did a lot worse with Jewish Americans, and South Florida obviously has a lot of those as well, myself included. But I think the other underrated trend has been age polarization. And what I mean by that is that relative even to 8 years ago, older people have become more Republican and younger people have become more liberal. And Florida is just one of the oldest, it might be the oldest state in the country. When you look even just in terms of demographic change, a lot of people think, oh, demographic change is good for Democrats in Florida. But the actual numbers are that every single year, very large, probably like literally 1 million older retirees move. These are older voters who don't have college degrees, who come from places like Ohio or Wisconsin. And we've crunched the numbers on this. We think that just that effect of older people moving into Florida made Florida 1% more Republican in 2020 than it otherwise would have been. And so, that's something that makes things very hard for Democrats in Florida, is that the nature of our party right now, is that we've had a lot of success appealing to younger voters. I think partially because, younger voters make up, the people who run the Democratic Party, but we've had a lot of trouble appealing to older voters. And I think the key to winning in Florida is, to do as well as Barack Obama did in 2012. And reverse those gains. Otherwise, it will be very hard just because of the demographic makeup of the state.
Let me ask you about some buzz I'm hearing. I don't know. I haven't been in New York in over a year. So I don't know. I hear AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is really seriously thinking about going in a primary against Senator Schumer. Is there any substance to that, or is it just gossip?
Well, you would know as well as me. I'm a big fan of Senator Schumer for what it's worth, and also like all young people, I like AOC. I think that it's a really interesting question. It's a big question. What's going to happen to her district in redistricting? The other possibility that has been discussed is that she might try to run for governor, particularly since there's a substantial chance that Cuomo might resign. I personally hope that she doesn't primary Chuck Schumer. I think Chuck Schumer is doing an excellent job. I think he more than other Democrats, something I really like about him, even if he might be a little bit more conservative than me, is that he's been a politician for a very long time, and I think like Joe Biden, he understands this older era of politics. Politics used to be about kind of showing up on the local news station and talking to voters about economic issues. But I think in the last 10 years, it's been much more about like getting activists to be excited about you on Twitter, getting liberals to donate money to you online. And, Chuck Schumer, I think, represents that kind of old brand of US politics. And, frankly, in Florida, it's something we could use more of.
David, what a pleasure talking with you. I hope you're keeping warm. Up in New York, it's 80 degrees, by the way, here in Miami today. Great.
I'm jealous.
Hopefully I'll get to talk with you again. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be interviewed here.